Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. Wherever you're joining us from via Zoom, via Facebook, or other means, we welcome you. We appreciate you being here. This evening's program is held under the theme Remembering, Memorializing, Commemorating, and Honoring the Life's Journey and Legacy of Louise Emily Langdon Little and Malcolm X. Their legacy, our heritage, our history. This virtual public education forum is being facilitated by the Ladigue Community Heritage and Honors Program in collaboration with the IPE Dare to Understand Enlightenment series and Caribbean Freedom Fighters. 57 years ago today, our brother Malcolm, a stalwart voice for the oppressed peoples of the world, had his life cut short at the hands of an assassin. Malcolm was the son of a Grenadian mother, Louise Little, a stalwart and activist in her own right. Today, as we gather to commemorate their legacies, we pause for a moment of silence to remember their sacrifice. Thank you. This evening, I am your host and co-moderator, Tesfa Aki Peterson. And our program this evening is going to be a packed one with wonderful presentations from scholars of Grenadian heritage who will be sharing their thoughts, their vision on the legacies of our dear Louise Langdon Little and her son Malcolm. This evening, I am pleased to have as my co-moderator, Miss Lindona Laguerre from the beautiful village of Ladigue, a place where a lot of this work is emanating from. Lindona is a teacher, an educator for the last 18 years at Boca Secondary School. She specializes in teaching French and has previously taught both English A and B. She holds a bachelor's degree in education in language education, literatures of English from the UWI Open Campus, and a Master of Arts degree in learning and teaching from the University of Roehampton, London. She is also certified DEFI, French Language Diploma Education Examiner, and has completed various certificate courses in French language learning and pedagogy. Help me welcome my co-host and co-moderator for this evening, Ms. Lindona Laguerre.
Merci beaucoup, Tesfa. Bonsoir tout le monde. Bienvenue. It is our hope that tonight's session will enlighten and leave you motivated to go ahead and make some meaningful contributions and be your own influencers and agents of change in your respective communities. Before we begin, just some housekeeping matters. If you have any questions, please place your questions in the chat where the moderator will communicate this with the presenter. And to chat, please set your chat to all panelists and attendees. To officially start off this session, it is my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Claudia George Andrew, who will give some brief remarks. Mrs. Claudia George Andrew is the Deputy Principal of the Holy Innocents Anglican School. She has been a teacher educator for the last 36 years and holds a bachelor's degree in literacy studies from the University of the West Indies. She's a proud founding member of the Honors Heritage Group and is a nominee interim director of the NGO. Welcome, Mrs. George Andrew.
We may be having a little bit of a snafu there with Claudia, having a little trouble getting on maybe. So Lindona, I'm going to pass the baton on to you as we listen as Lindona reads our first citation for this evening, tribute to our dear Helen Louise Langdon Little. Back to you.
Louise Helen Norton Little, née Langdon, granddaughter of Jupiter and Mary Ann Langdon, quoted to be liberated Africans, was born in 1896 on Grenadian soil in the village of Ladigue, St. Andrews. A proud daughter of Grenada, Louise read everything she could. She was particularly concerned with the mistreatment of people of color in her community. She took that love for words and activism with her to Montreal in 1917, where she became a stalwart member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, an organization founded by Marcus Garvey, the Black nationalist leader. Her involvement in the UNIA led to her meeting with Earl Little, a Baptist preacher, another activist. 2 years later, Earl and Louise were married in the US and went on to have 7 children. Along with her husband, Earl Little, she built a legacy of Black fortitude and pride, one based on shared commitment to political change and activism. Collins, a legacy that was furthered by the life pursuits of their children, of which Malcolm X was the fourth. As an active member of the UNIA and UNIA secretary, she was lauded to have actively worked alongside Earl in promoting the UNIA ideals and rumored to have played a pivotal role in the editing, publishing, and distribution of the Negro World, the Garveyite newspaper. Her close working relationship with Marcus Garvey extended to letter writing and providing a place of refuge when he was being hunted by the FBI, Blaine 2017. Louise Little, daughter of Ladigue, an activist, a proud Black woman, an educator, a mother, we honor you today. We honor your legacy as a brilliant thinker, a committed activist, a proud and resilient woman. Your love for your people and concern for their struggles were eloquently expressed in your life work and in the lives of your children. Our Grenadian hearts burst with pride and with the knowledge that your activism was cultivated right here on Grenadian soil, providing everlasting inspiration for future generations of Grenadian women. We are proud to call you our own. Your commitment to education and Black nationalism are to be emulated. You gave the world a great gift in the life and legacy of your son, Malcolm. Your son was proud to tell the world of your proud spirit and your dedication to educating your children while doing your best to protect them in a racist society. For all the ways that you fought on the side of the oppressed, we are proud to call you our own. We honor you, daughter of Ladigue, proud product of our Grenadian soil, an example to be emulated, activist, educator, mother extraordinaire. We are proud to call you our own. We honor you. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Ashe, indeed. Thank you, Lindonna, for that eloquent and very heartfelt tribute to our dear Louise Langdon Little. Like you said, a daughter of the Grenadian soil, mother of renowned Black nationalist activist Malcolm X, and whose legacy we celebrate this evening. And we should all be proud as Grenadians to know that we have both this wonderful, wonderful personages in the lives of Louise and her son, Malcolm. At this time, we are pleased to welcome Miss Claudia George, who will do the citation who will offer us some remarks on behalf of the community firstly, and then will do the citation for Malcolm X. Welcome, Claudia. I think you're muted there a little bit.
Thank you, Tesfa. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. I greet you with the words of our motto, the words of Malcolm X: the future belongs to the ones who prepare for it today. As an educator who has lived in this community my entire life and who has taught at the Holy Innocents Anglican School for 36 years, let me say how proud I am to be a member of the community and the school that gave Louise Little her foundational education. Knowing the influence she has had internationally, primarily because of the work of her son Malcolm X, I am keenly aware that the work we do at the school and the work we are doing here even now may be helping to nurture the next Malcolm X, the next great one who will contribute to the advancement of our people and lift up the name of this community, of our people and our nation. I have been involved in this initiative as a volunteer from day one when the Institute approached members of the staff of the school and community to be a part of the preparation for Dr. Merle Collins' Emancipation Lecture in 2019. Our preparation included a Goodwill free concert and exhibit at the school. I'm incredibly happy to be a part of this ongoing program to honor sons and daughters and their relatives of this close community of Ladig. It is an honor for me to share these brief remarks to honor and in remembrance of Louise Langdon Little and her famous civil rights activist son, Malcolm X. Now we are embarking on the formation of the Ladig Community Heritage Honors NGO to nurture the seeds planted by Dr. Collins and IPE in 2019 into branches, like the school drumming program, like the Calypso of Tribute by Black Wizard, our own living legend of our community, like the Ladig Heritage Honors Remembrance Day of the third Monday of February, like the community and the national petition we will raise to have that day as one of the nation's special days of remembrance. And this event, our signature annual Community Heritage Honors Public Education Program, first, to honor and remember and learn from the life journey and legacy of Louise Langdon Little and Malcolm X. Their legacy, our heritage, our history. I will now invite my daughter, Kaylee Andrew, to read the citation of Malcolm X.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will now read the citation on Malcolm X. Our brother Malcolm, we hail you. Son of Grenadian soil, we hail you. A clarion voice for oppressed peoples all over the world, we hail you. Malcolm X, as he came to be known internationally, was born to Earl and Louise Little in a time when Jim Crow laws determined the destinies of Black people in America. Malcolm came to manhood in these turbulent times. His autobiography tells of the family's many encounters with the white racial order of the day. These encounters led to the apparent assassination of his father at the hands of white supremacists and the eventual splitting up of his family. Young Malcolm was a handful. His early life was full of action and adventure, most of it on the other side of the law. Detua Red, as he came known in the streets, ended his run in prison. Malcolm X, that the world came to know, was formed in those years in prison. As he says in his own words, I have often reflected upon the new vistas that reading has opened up to me. I knew right there in prison that reading had changed forever the course of my life. As I see it today, the ability to read awoke inside of me some long dormant craving to be mentally alive. Today, we salute the intellectual giant, the global civil rights icon, the man of conviction and spirit, who we call our brother Malcolm. Brother Malcolm, we salute you for your commitment to the cause of oppressed peoples around the world. Brother Malcolm, we salute you for taking a stand against injustice everywhere and for saying, those who stand for nothing will fall for anything. Brother Malcolm, We salute you for advocating for education as the passport to a bright future, and for the part you played in educating generations of oppressed peoples all over the world. Today, as Grenadians, we are proud to be part of your legacy. We are proud to call you a son of the soil, a Grenadian whose influence felt on a global scale and whose life continues to resonate today. We take up your call to fight for justice and freedom for all. We salute your sacrifice in giving your life for the cause of freedom. We will never forget. Brother Malcolm, we salute you. Ashe, ashe, ashe.
Ashe, 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 indeed. Thank you, Claudia and daughter Kelly. Oh, the future is bright in Ladig. The future is bright in Ladig. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. At this time, we are continuing on with the program, and we're going to bring on our first presenter for this evening, Mr. Martin Felix. Mr. Martin Felix holds a BSc in Psychology and MSc in Education and is a professor of Caribbean Studies at the Fashion Institute of Technology in the State University System of New York. Martin Felix is an educator, writer, and visual artist. His research interests include immigration, African diaspora, African cultural retention, among others, Caribbean history and reparations. He is an adjunct professor of Caribbean Studies at the Fashion Institute of Technology at the State University of New York, a co-editor of Big Drum Nation, we know that website very well, Caribbean Journal of Arts and Culture. His professional memberships include the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora, I also know that one very well, and the Caribbean Studies Association. This evening, I am pleased to present our first presentation for this evening, titled Repatriating Malcolm, How the Legacy of Malcolm X and Louise Langdon Little is an Untapped Resource for Grenada. It's an untapped national resource. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome our first presenter for the evening, Professor Martin Felix. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Am I being heard? Yes. Okay, well, so thank you all. I will first of all like to thank the Institute for People's Enlightenment for inviting me to give this appreciation of the life and contributions of Malcolm X and Louise Langdon Little. But before we begin, I just wanted to spend a couple of seconds to add to the tribute that was paid before to the Malcolm X's family for their tragedies, and to add to that, unfortunately, the latest tragedy of the Malcolm X Louise Langdon Little family, and that's the case of Malika Shabazz, pictured here to the left, who transitioned to the ancestors on November 23rd, 2021. So a couple of moments of silence. Widely considered one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, Malcolm X's autobiography has been the top 10 New York Times bestseller for many years and continues to sell about 150,000 copies every year. Malcolm's truth-telling has influenced many who made an impact on the US and globally. We can mention the likes of playwright August Wilson, poet Audre Lorde, who by the way has Grenadian roots, the Black Panther Party founders Huey Newton, Bobby Seals, who have all credited Malcolm X as the spark that lit their light. First Black President Barack Obama, former Attorney General Eric Holder, have similarly credited Malcolm's journey as their inspiration. Malcolm's message has had a major influence on the rise of hip hop, as an art form and has been adopted by youth groups fighting for their own identity struggles in many nations. Rap artist Chuck D, Ice Cube, Kendrick Lamar, as well as reggae artists such as Mutuburuka, Dennis Brown, and others have also credited Malcolm X as their inspiration. Malcolm's image has been utilized around the world as iconic as Bob Marley, Che Guevara, etc. Many across the world utilize Malcolm's image in protests. In 1984, Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, issued a postage stamp with Malcolm X's image in honor of the world struggle against racial discrimination. The United States honored Malcolm X with a stamp in 1999 as part of the Post Office Black Heritage Series. Omaha, Nebraska has had a Malcolm X Day off and on since 1976. The house that Malcolm Little family grew up in is now being considered to be made a landmark, or at least the area. But the release of Spike Lee's Malcolm X in 1992 reincarnated Malcolm X to a younger generation, this time in color. But the essence of Malcolm X's contribution to civil rights, political rights, human rights, anti-racist and Pan-Africanist causes are well known. What is not sufficiently highlighted in the many narratives about Malcolm X is the role of his parents, particularly his very educated and socially committed activist Grenadian mother, who nurtured him and imbued in him a lifelong political and ethical skill set, the basis of a political education that will inform Malcolm's future generation. The lack of awareness of the contribution of an immigrant woman who has given so much is testimony to the resilience of patriarchy and male supremacy within the wider society and the civil rights movement in particular. Les Payne argues in The Dead Are Arising that even in Malcolm X's Alex Haley's autobiography, the early influence of an interaction with his parents, including his mother, is overlooked for the sake of crediting the whole of his development to the spiritual leader he will later encounter. But at a more basic level, at a more general level, the obscuring of Louise's role reflects a historiographical bias in the perception of women as lesser contributors of struggle and as promotion of a subservient role. And I am so happy that we have people among us today in this forum that are working to redress this imbalance. Dr. Merle Collins, Aki Peterson, Keisha Blaine, Professor McDuffie, and the likes of Jessica Russell, etc., are undertaking the mission to excavate Louise Little from historical obscurity. What I am doing here with this short presentation is tapping on their shoulders. It is ironic, as it is unnatural, that we have to uncover women's agency when our own history is replete with the contributions of heroic women. Among others, we can reference the agency of Queen Ya Ashantewa of the same West African area that Louise Langdon's grandparents came from, Jupiter and Mary Langdon, Mary Jane. They came from that same area of West Africa where her grandparents were most likely kidnapped. Queen Ya Asantewaa declared war on the colonists and said that Since the men of the clan were afraid to fight, she'll take on the fight. But there's a long list of other such brave women in African resistance throughout the diaspora. Nanny of the Maroons, Queen Nzinga, Kali House of the, one of the early reparations activists in the United States and the diaspora, just to name a few. It is ironic that some of these very issues of combating patriarchy are some of the very issues that Louise was combating as a radical activist who challenged patriarchy and racism. This deficit has robbed us a lot, and we need to address this. The Malcolm X and Louise Langdon legacy provide useful lens through which we can examine a variety of themes, not the least of them, positive example of the immigrant experience, valuable lessons for personal transformation, and the basis of an exploration of a reimagined transnational Grenadian citizenry. I agree with Selwyn Kojo when he says that, like an individual, a society can only know itself and its future when it explores its antecedents, those who came before. We can have little notion of where we are going if we do not consciously appropriate our past and make it a part of our very living present and our future. And Malcolm X has said very similarly, and also Marcus Garvey. But at the most basic level, it is important to recognize that without Louise Langdon, there will be no Malcolm X. And to say this is not to make a biological case. It is a social, educational, and ideological one. Louise Norton Langdon's teachings and values were consciously imparted to Malcolm and all the children of Black pride, racial consciousness, social commitment, and it has molded Malcolm to become who he was. We learn from Dr. Collins that even the naming of her children, Wilfred, Reginald, and his brother, and the other brothers, including Malcolm, had a certain amount of agency. Louise Little was consciously connecting them to their Grenadian roots through the names of their relatives back home. In a time of heightened xenophobia and anti-immigrant fervor on both sides of the Atlantic, destinations where the masses of many Grenadian and Caribbean people settle, it is important to share Louise's story as someone who came to North America and gave more to the US and the world than she could ever have taken. Louisa, popularly known as Louise, was raised by her maternal grandmother, Mary Jane Langdon. Her grandparents, Jupiter and Mary Jane Langdon, were free Africans brought to Grenada after emancipation. But their existence in Grenada, their life in Grenada was very much similar to those of the enslaved. It is well known that her mother, then a child, was violated by a privileged British administrator living in Grenada at the time. Dr. Collins has done an amazing job tracing the circumstances of Louise's birth, so I wouldn't go into any greater detail. Born in 1896, Louise emigrated from Grenada in June 1917. The population of Grenada then was 63,000. The Grenada Louise left during the closing years of World War I was one of few opportunities in employment and education, resulted in massive immigration. Only a quarter of school-aged children, however, were enrolled in schools. And during that decade, immigration first affected the natural population increase on the island. Between 1911 and 1921, 12,000 people immigrated, the highest volume since slavery. While 70% of all immigrants were male, there were also growing demands for female, mostly as domestic workers. Grenadian immigrants went to virtually every corner of the Americas, and to the United Kingdom. A Pan-Africanist missionary, as I will call her, Louise's activism took her from Canada, from Montreal, Canada, to Philadelphia and to the American Midwest, areas that could not have been more unfamiliar to her, in terms of where she came from in Ladi, Grenada. A 20-year-old Grenadian girl migrated to Canada to live with her Garveyite uncle, Edgerton, in Montreal. According to Dr. Collin, Louise helped establish the groundwork for development of the organization in Canada before continuing her Garveyite activism, developing the work of the Garvey movement in the UNIA in Philadelphia and the US Midwest. 2 years after arriving in Canada, young Louise will marry a fiery Black preacher from Georgia on May 10th, 1919. A few years later, the couple welcomed a little boy who will eventually take the name Malcolm X, 1925 to 1965. A fellow Garveyite, Louise preferred that she was attracted to Earl because of his Blackness. So this was a young woman who was fresh out of rural Grenada and was on the front line of the racial equality battles. She was sent to Omaha, Nebraska by the UNIA because of her and her husband's militants. Earl and Louise were dispatched to build UNIA chapters in Omaha, Nebraska after a violent race riot broke out in 1919. Thousands of white mobs burned down a county courthouse and lynched a Black man, Willie Brown. They almost lynched the mayor of that town as well. Blacks in Omaha were forced to arm and defend themselves. And Louise and her husband were sent there to aid the defense of the Black communities there and to help build UNIA chapters. But these were hardly new to Louise and Earl. KKK threats already had been threatening the little family in Philadelphia before they moved to Omaha. So the Red Summer basically was one of the many cities. Well, the Red Summer spread across the United States. The racial violence, major racial riots and lynchings were called collectively the Red Summer. And the Omaha riot was one of the sparks in these protests, in these rebellions, these white racist riots. So this is the atmosphere that Louise came to in the United States. It was not like coming to Brooklyn like many of us and London, many of us had, where we were basically in the comfort of people that were struggling, that had struggled before and made it much more acceptable living conditions. At least on 2 occasions, she showed her own militancy against white supremacy. Even when she was pregnant with Malcolm X, members of the Ku Klux Klan surrounded the family at night, brandishing shotguns and the rifle while her husband was away. She confronted them using psychology to fend off, but made no apology for her activism. Again, she stood ground. So Louise regularly encouraged her children to read Black nationalist newspapers. She taught math, philosophy, and poetry to the kids while they were at home, planting a literary seed which ignited Malcolm's insatiable love for reading and his own espousal of Garveyite politics. According to journalist Les Payne, who did extensive research with Louise's family for his book, The Dead Are Arising, Louise came to the US hell-bent on ensuring all rights due to her children were attained with sound education and a life of accomplishment. He quotes Malcolm's older brother, Wilfred, recalling that Louise was well-versed in language and grammar and was emphatic about how she taught her children. She did not accept or allow them to use the term Negro or colored. She instilled in them that they are Black people. My mother, quoting, "My mother was serious, never jovial. She will always get us to the facts about what we were talking about. She will sing Matt to us and teach us French songs. My mother was the one who brought knowledge to us." And that was Wilfred actually talking about the experience growing up with mom. He was Malcolm X's older brother. Malcolm X, in his autobiography, reflecting on his mother's impact on his consciousness, pointed out, "I remember that she will tell me to get out of the house, let the sun shine on you so you can get some color." So, as Sister Professor Merle Collins pointed out in her article on the study of Louise Little, this was a warning to Malcolm X and her children about not getting, in using my own words, not getting twisted about race, privilege, and colorism, shadism. So Louise was really and truly a journalist. She signed off her bulletins by saying Louise Little, reporter. It's unfortunate that, as I said before, because of patriarchy, much of her stories are hidden, but I know that there are people in our midst that are actually beginning to go into the archive and get some more of Louise's actual intellectual work. Malcolm X and Louise's transformative narratives are very valuable as social and individual models. The conservative thinker Andrew Bernstein, in Heroes, Legends, and Champions, Why Heroism Matters, identifies some basic characteristics of heroes. They provide value that further human life. They give people immense value from recognizing and admiring their heroism, and they're distinguished by the profound spiritual value that they provide by their examples. We already know that Malcolm X fits here, but when, as Dr. Collins acknowledged on Louise's contribution, when we consider the role that she played as mother, activist, educator, woman, and nurturer of her children's imagination, in some ways, she is actually 3 times a hero. Unfortunately, Louise was a victim of the system, and we know the story now that she was actually institutionalized at the Kalamazoo State Hospital. And this is how the hospital looked when she was institutionalized in 1927. And some people even question whether she actually had the mental breakdown that she was, was said to have had. Because when she was finally released from prison, Malcolm X and the family said that she was almost back to normal after a few months. So all of this was precipitated by the loss of her husband through racial violence, the efforts of the system, the institutional racism to take away her house from her, especially after the death of her husband, and the constant harassment of the state on the family, and the Ku Klux Klan, absolutely. I think there's a quote from Dr. Merle Collins, which was very startling. She said, in 10 years after leaving her home in Grenada, Louise Little had worked as an activist in both Canada and the United States and had 8 children born 1920, 1921, 1923, 1925, 1927, 1928, 1929, and 1938. Louise Langdon and Malcolm X present great models as community organizers, examples of personal transformation, and Black pride. These issues that they champion are enduring issues even today. We still have some of these issues with us today that Louise and later Malcolm were championing for change. For example, we see lack of self-pride in many, amongst our population throughout the diaspora. Skin bleaching seems to be coming back. Growing inequality, even worse in many cases than when they were struggling. Assault on women's rights throughout the diaspora and Grenada. Louisa's life of activism and Malcolm's core messaging provide tools to help us move from self-hate to self-acceptance, redirecting oppressed people's energy towards self-determination and community empowerment. A shift from the prevailing bottom-up organizing as opposed to top-down. For his part, Malcolm has helped reframe the oppression of Black Americans from a civil rights issue to a human rights issue. He even took the issue of Black oppression internationally. He was a master of coalition building. Louise left similar lessons, and a life of service is an important contribution from both of these heroes. They consciously dedicated their lives to the upliftment of Black people from oppression. These are examples for our people to model. As the Grenadian diaspora continues to mature and having Grenadians in greater numbers, in many cases, people that will consider themselves to be Grenadians, we have to really rethink, what the diaspora means, and I think we have to actually begin to see our people, our nation as transnational. One of the ways in which we can do this is to begin to recognize Louise Langdon and Malcolm X even posthumously. Like, for example, issuing passports to Malcolm X, and Louise Langdon and the family, the Malcolm X and Louise Langdon family, as Grenadians, right? And I think this is symbolic, but also very meaningful. In 1965, just a few weeks before his assassination, Malcolm X visited Nigeria, his grandparents' homeland, at the University of Ibadan, and was renamed Omawali, which means, in the Yoruba language, the child has returned home. Let us take Malcolm X back to Grenada. There are many ways we can do this. We can complete Malcolm's, or continue Malcolm's legacy and Louis' legacy by doing a number of different things. Like, for example, we can join the wider struggle, a campaign to exonerate Marcus Garvey for this unlawful, unjust, and flawed conviction for mail fraud. It was just a matter of $25 in any case. Louise Little and her husband wrote letters to Calvin Coolidge asking for Garvey to be released from prison at the time. I think it will be a great continuation, great continuity if we were to actually join this fight and ask or demand that Joseph Biden, US President Joseph Biden, exonerate Garvey at this point. Obviously, we have to consciously fight against the erasure of Louise Langdon's role in the history books and other narratives, making the 3rd Monday of February, Louise Langdon and Malcolm X Day, memorializing and honoring Louise Langdon and Louise Langdon Little and Malcolm X will be great tributes to these heroes. We need to actually teach Louise Langdon's legacy and Malcolm X's legacy in the schools in Grenada. It's kind of ironic that Malcolm X's book was banned from Grenada shortly after the invasion. Okay, and I think it really says a lot in terms of how much we lost during that time. We should begin to regain what was lost, and one of the ways we can do this is to create lesson plans around Louise Langdon Little and Malcolm X. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Martin Felix, for that very provocative presentation. I love the way that you gave us a history lesson, you gave us a lesson in interpersonal politics, in activist politics, a little bit of American history. And then you asked us a question, you gave us the provocation. What do we owe to the legacies of Louise Langdon Little, our own Grenadian daughter, and her son, Malcolm X, a son of Grenadian soil? What do we as Grenadians owe to the legacies of Malcolm and Louise? I think that there are some interesting questions that can arise from a conversation around how we commemorate, how we honor, how we continue to collaborate with these people. They're not lost to us. They are here. Their legacies live on, as you've pointed out, in the work of Professors Collins, McDuffie, myself, etc., who are very interested in excavating that history for the collective patrimony. So this is work that is alive and well. This is work that is being inspired even from beyond the grave by these persons, and we're happy to be given that charge and to be given that provocation to continue the work and to take it even further. So thank you again, Professor Felix, for that very illuminating and thought-provoking presentation. At this time, I will turn over to my co-host, Lindana, and she is going to introduce our next presenter for this evening.
Thank you, Tesfa. As we continue to delve into the legacy of Louise Langdon Little and look at her importance to Grenadian stories, it is my honor to introduce Professor Emerita Dr. Merle Collins. Dr. Merle Collins is Professor Emerita at the University of Maryland. She has been a professor in the Department of English for 26 years, where she also served for 2 years as chair of the university's Latin American Studies Center, now the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Center. A widely published author, her repertoire includes novels, poetry, short stories, and critical essays. In the 1990s, she taught at the University of North London, UK. In the 1970s, Dr. Collins taught high school in Grenada and St. Lucia. From 1981 to 1983, she was a researcher on Latin America for the Grenada Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Her current research interests, the life and legacy of Louise Langdon Norton Little. It is my pleasure to invite to the podium, to this mic, Dr. Merle Collins. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Lindana. And thank you, Professor Martin Felix, for your informative and thought-provoking contribution. To everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I thank the Institute for People's Enlightenment for inviting me, and it's an honor to share the virtual stage with others interested in researching and talking about the life of Louise Langdon Little. So, to my topic, her importance to Grenada's stories. And I can well imagine that some would ask, is she important to Grenada's stories? Well, in my estimation, she is, and I'll try to explain why. We see around us every day the need for stories that help to shape our perspectives, both the historical accounts and the fictional narratives that certainly in the experience of Caribbean writing, are often born from historical accounts. To help us think through the conundrum that is the colonial legacy, we need writers, essayists, historians. And when I talk about Louise Langdon's importance to Grenada's stories, I am referring to all those forms of writing and more. Grenada, like other places in the Caribbean, has been heavily shaped by colonial stories. And this is not only about those who had high school education and studied in universities. The colonial authorities in the Caribbean, I would say, did a remarkable job in different ways for them and for us, with the foundational primary school education from long ago. Even though the texts are different now, the legacy remains. The work done with Louise Langdon, her generation, generations that followed, including mine, can emphasize for us why stories are important. Think of the techniques used in our primary school books of old. Consider, for example, just this one sentence from a colonial primary school text, one of the royal readers. In the story, you get the line, "Imagine yourself, gentle reader, watching a savage arranging his traps." And there is an image of someone described as Indian in the Americas, around the Hudson Bay area in Canada, arranging his traps. Now, no big speech, no historical account, just a simple story using supposedly harmless words. And if we think they're harmless, we're already hooked into a perspective that is colonial. You, the gentle reader, are drawn into and on the side of the perspective of the white colonial writing this and presenting it to you and telling you, you gentle person, that you are on my colonial side. So you think of the Carib, the Kalinago, the Mosquito, the Mohawk, the Lenape as savage. And at that tender age, we don't even realize that an ideology is being shaped. My own marveling only happened later, long after I was the gentle reader. So when I talk about the need for stories, I am not only talking about the grand historical account. I'm talking about, the fiction, the poetry, etc. Louise Little came from a group of people who, whatever the contradictions born of personal experience, and we all have those, these people were proud of themselves. And this was at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. They were proud of themselves as African. Aside from the fact that they seem to have found really thoughtful teachers at the Holy Innocents Anglican School, indications are that they were also able in the home to give their children a community and family education that sustained them. Because sometimes, when we're talking about education, we forget that some of that also comes from the community, from the family. In spite of the brutality of a Jim Crow approach when Louise Langdon Little reached the United States, she kept those lessons from La Digue. And the mention of the Jim Crow approach is not suggesting that things were great for race in Grenada at that time, at the end of the 1890s, early 1900s, and absolutely awful in the United States. In both places, there were white colonials bent on exploitation of African labor. But by that time in Grenada, and the US, if we're looking at the two locations with whites in control in both the locations, Caribbean and the United States of America, were at different places, different phases in their project of exploitation. In the US, it was being consolidated. In the Caribbean, the white colonials were leaving, slowly but leaving, and Black people and those they referred to as colored were increasingly in the majority. What the records say about Louise Little's family experience suggests that they had severe personal experience of white colonial brutality. Research suggests that the family may have closed in on itself and not chosen to share all of that horror with the world. The larger issue for us as writers, as thinkers, though, is, I feel, how that links with the survival, migration, remaking, the struggle of individuals and community in the post-emancipation period. Louise Langdon's story, at home and in the diaspora, is a story of struggle, survival, triumph, disappointments. She was born in La Digue towards the end of the 19th century, went to Holy Innocents Anglican School, left for Canada in 1917, married and moved to the United States in 1919, and you heard some of this already. Worked as an activist in the Garvey movement. The family was terrorized by the Klan. Her husband was killed in 1931, allegedly by white supremacists. Her 8 children were farmed out to different families by the US Social Services. In 1938, she was put into a mental institution, and she stayed there for some 26 years and was taken out of there by her children in 1963. She died in 1991. So hers was a long, complex, sometimes apparently even contradictory journey, and it seems to me that it has a lot to teach us. At the time when Louise Langdon went to primary school in Grenada, early 20th century colonial Caribbean, about half of those, or even less, registered for elementary education actually attended school. But Louise Langdon was one of those who did. Perhaps even more importantly, we hear the evidence of this from her children, and especially from the oldest, Wilfred Little, who remembers not only the white teachers in Michigan who did not encourage them to succeed, but also the teacher at home. That's what Wilfred remembers more. The mother and educator who told them they could do it, who took what she felt good from the school education, and Wilfred Little tells us, taught them the lessons again when they came home from school, taking out the things she felt diminished them. Saying, well, you don't have to take on a teacher on this one. Yeah, let me tell you. So she was a teacher at home. She taught them that they were part of a Black international. She gave them also lessons that she remembered from the Holy Innocents Primary School, St. Andrews, Grenada. And when I read some of the things that Wilfred says she taught them, I say, I know where that came from. So these are really important things for La Digue, I would say, for us to think about. And think how progressive Louise Langdon was for her generation, that although presented with models of white colonial heroes, she followed the ideas about Blackness and Black internationalism taught by someone like Marcus Garvey, also Caribbean, Jamaican, who even then critiqued aspirations toward whiteness and colonial mores. She was not at the end of the 20th century or 21st century like us, looking back, understanding, critiquing Garvey. She was involved at that time. So she was part of the ferment of Black political thought during the early 20th century, questioning enough to participate in a Black political movement and to teach her children what she believed to be correct. So let us be proud of her. She was writing her own story, giving an example to her children. And it is certainly partly because of his mother, Louise Langdon, from La Digue, St. Andrew, Grenada, that the world talks today about the ideas and journey of another son, Malcolm X, a figure who dared to be controversial, to follow what he believed, and to be in the public spotlight as he grew, always transforming his ideas. And let me pause here, move away from the mother a little bit to talk about the influence of the son. Because to some extent, the interest of Grenadians in acknowledging the importance of Louise Little depends a bit on perceptions of her son, Malcolm X. I know that I have been asked by some individuals two key questions. Why is this important? And what is this thing anyway with Malcolm and X as a last name? Right? Is that important? And I'm pleased that, people, friends who thought they could ask me this, did in fact ask me. And in fact, someone in La Digue asked me, he, meaning Malcolm, know anything about us? He ever come here? No, but his brother Wilfred, oldest and the one closest to his mother's ideas, did. And this concerns Grenada, knowing to value what La Digue taught and passed on. And we should also say that Wilfred lived a lot longer than Malcolm. But think about it. Whether or not we choose X as a last name, the story is this. African people taken to the Caribbean, the grandparents of Malcolm X and others, simply had their names taken away. It happened, of course, in other parts of the Americas. In the south of what is today the United States of America, Malcolm X's father and his father's people acquired the last name Little because the white planters who stole the labor and or who lived in and around Georgia where they found themselves were called Little. So all of us have these European surnames. Collins is one. Louise Langdon had the last name Langdon because some of the white planters and colonial civil service figures who organized labor activities in the 19th century in Grenada had the last name Langdon, and the last name was given to some Africans whose labor they used. When found as a Black person's name in the 19th century, it meant that this was someone who perhaps Mr. White Langdon enslaved, or if it was after the period of enslavement, Mr. Langdon's worker, so a Langdon. In the 19th century, people were closer to the thing actually happening, so the outrage could be greater then. But at least we should know enough of the history and appreciate the efforts of those thinking about it. In 1863 in Grenada, at about the time you begin to have the last name Langdon in the historical records for Grenadians, meaning now for Black Grenadians, there was a white John Langdon who was an attorney for proprietors of estates on the eastern and northeastern sides of Grenada, the parishes of St. David and St. Andrew, where the Langdons, Louise Langdon's family settled. The records tell us that in 1863, John Langdon requisitioned 26 Africans from Mirabeau, and I think this is around the time that the Langdons, the grandparents came in. 26 Africans from Mirabeau, 10 for Sincere, both in areas where many Black Langdons later lived. The white Langdon, John Langdon, was also elected to the Legislative Council in 1862. So the Langdons were white and in positions of influence in Grenada. And when in Grenada's stories and in stories of colonized communities generally, we talk about a white Langdon and a Black Langdon, or whatever the name is, a white last name and an Indian one. We are really talking about issues of colonialism and power And of course, there are other possibilities. For example, in the course of this research, one Grenada Langdon who spoke to me, I realized that she got her name from a consensual Black-white relationship known about in the family. So just by way of information and understanding of our complexities, that is important. But most of the Black Langdons in Grenada got their names in other ways that were about a master-servant power dynamic. So our surnames, our last names often tell a complex tale of dispossession, or the fact that our ancestors could keep original names might sometimes signal class, year of arrival, etc. And we can tell these stories in fiction, in poetry, because the stories help us understand how our societies were created. And just, in the course of my research, in one historical document, a child's Christian name is entered as Felicia, and the surname for both Felicia and her parents is entered on the document as a coolie on preference estate. That's what is in the surname column. And in one 1876 case, the child's name is Martha, and in the surname column, I see African. So complete loss of the original name. Presumably, this Martha is a liberated African, someone who entered the country after abolition, after emancipation, because this is 1876 in Grenada. And in communities, sometimes a hierarchy developed because of the stories told by European colonials about savages and uncivilized people. Those with the European names could come to feel superior to those they thought of as African or Indian unfortunates. So let us celebrate the fact that Louise Langdon from La Digue, St. Andrew, Grenada, had African relatives. The oral narratives say grandparents proud of Africa who were able to tell her to keep pride in that part of her inheritance, even while she took in the colonial primary school education that she was given. Her son Malcom and her other children embody both religious preferences and a critique of colonialism in their choice of X as a last name. So we have to write her story in literature, in history, in poetry, in song. And thank you, Wizard. The Calypsonian, the mighty wizard, Elwin McQuilkin, also from La Digue, has just recorded a song about Louise Langdon Little. We have to write stories in which the hillsides of La Digue appear. Stories in which a young man leaving La Digue for Canada describes himself, which we see in the documents as West Indian and African. This was Louise Little's uncle going to Canada in 1913. So it seems that this was a family culture that Louise Langdon came from as well, part of her inheritance from La Digue. Inheritance, yes, from the La Digue primary school, from the Anglican school, and also the socialization that came from the family. And I think it is important to the stories of Grenada that a young Grenadian woman in the 1920s tells her children about a Black experience that is not only in the United States of America, but is in Grenada, in the wider Caribbean, in the world, that in the diaspora, she contributes to helping her children develop a sense of themselves. These young Black children in the United States of America, then called Negro, only if people chose to be polite, that she contributes to their sense of themselves as part of a Black international. Wilfred Little, who was the oldest of the children, writes about that. Louise Langdon traveled with stories from La Digue, and Wilfred writes about that. Even before she left Grenada, she valued the example of Grenada's political thinker, T.A. Marichaud. And remember, she was 20, 21, yeah, at that time. Later, she valued the stories about Black life told by Marcus Garvey and by her uncle in Montreal, who helped raise money to support the Garvey movement. And at this point, I have to say thank you, Terence, family member in Grenada, because stories told within the family details still remembered among some in La Digue and elsewhere are important to our understanding and to our recreation of the experience. For various reasons then, the children were comfortable with removing the names of the white Langdon colonial, the white Norton colonial. In fact, in the autobiography of Malcolm X, we are told by Malcom that his mother, Louise, told him that her father, last name Norton, was a rapist. If so, the white Norton name could certainly be X'd out without regret. Perhaps it is there at all because of the patriarchal view that it is important to have a father's name, even if the father is a white sailor planter figure who was a rapist. Now, some have a different take on the viability of the story of rape, but I think, all of it, whether, whatever our take on it, all of it is important. And if Malcolm's memory is truthfully recorded in his autobiography, it suggests that white plantation owners in Grenada, as elsewhere, got away with a multitude of evils. And we know they did, because people felt what one researcher refers to as post-colonial shame. Sometimes victims feel ashamed instead of placing the shame where it should be. And whiteness was and continues to be valuable currency. And that too is a part of our very complex post-colonial story. Then of course there is the white little colonial of the Jim Crow era, from whom Louise Little's husband Earl got his last name. If you choose to do so, replace it with an X while you think through who you are and how you and many people within Black colonized humanity have come to have names that are European. And I spent so much time talking about this, because I know that a couple of people actually challenged me about that, saying, why we have to remember him anyway. So we can be proud of Louise Little from La Digue for giving her children from home the kind of education that made them feel good about themselves, so that as they went through various experiences on their journeys, even did things that they might not be so proud of later, they came back to tell each other to remember what our mother would say, or remember how Ma would do, which is what the oldest Wilfred says he told his younger brother Malcolm when Malcolm was in prison. Remember Ma. Louise Langdon's story and the way her children tell it, and I think that is very important, makes me say, celebrate the mothers. Celebrate her, Louise Langdon Little, mother, educator, teacher from the hillsides of La Digue and from La Digue Anglican School. Let us write about her in various ways and understand the importance of writing stories of many others, not only Louise Langdon Little, from Grenada and from working communities around the world. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. Very inspiring, very inspiring. It was brought across quite eloquently in your presentation that community is quite important in carrying and furthering and promoting ideologies of Black power, Black excellence, and shaping perspectives in general. And we are reminded through Louise that where we come from is really important. So as we go forth, we should carry that. And Louise carried her history, what she learned in her community, she used it in her home. And it's a reminder to us that the school is not the only place where our children can learn. And the community, we have to step up. We are all responsible as community members to play a part in furthering stories, the stories of how we came about, what shaped us into who we are, so that as children grow forth, they will continue to celebrate their Blackness, emulate persons who are striving for change and become influencers in their own ways and promote a heritage, Black empowerment. Okay, thank you so much for that. And I want us to remember our roles as we go forth. Think about what we can do in helping that little Black boy, that little Black girl to celebrate who they are, as Louise did in her home. Even though they were taught certain things in the school, she ensured that Black excellence was continued. Thank you so much. I will now turn you back over to our host, Tesfa.
Thank you, Lindana and Dr. Collins, as usual, just taking it home to us, giving us all the good stuff to think about, to ruminate on, to chew on, and even meeting the challenge, the people who would challenge, why is this necessary? Why is this important? It's important because it's a Grenadian story. It's important because we must continue to tell our stories. And at this time, we are done with the presentation portion of this evening's education forum, but we're happy to take your questions in the chat and your comments. The comments so far have been very positive. Thank you, Dr. Collins, for this informative and provocative presentation. We have a beautiful summary from Suzanne May. She says, telling our own stories helps us to understand the complexities of our society. And indeed, our Caribbean societies are complex places, complex sites of history, and continue to be complex sites of social change and potential transformation. At this time, like I said, we're open to questions from the audience. I do have a question. Yes, for the person asking if there's a recording, the recording will be uploaded to the Caribbean Freedom Fighters YouTube. And yes, this evening's program is being recorded. I had a question earlier on, I believe that was directed to Martin Felix, asking, should the Holy Innocents Anglican School be renamed in honor of Louise Langdon Little? Somebody was asking that early on. What do we think? Martin, you there?
I'm here. I'm very reluctant to take a position on that. I think that we really need to honor both Louise and Malcolm in very, very concrete ways. When it comes to renaming the school in her honor, I will be very happy with this. But I will say that I think this is a local decision. I think the people of the community, I think, they will be the final arbiter of this. But I'm very much in favor of, renaming our schools, and I think no one is perhaps deserving of such an honor as Louise Langdon. So.
Well, I'm going to ask you a personal follow-up to that. Since one of the themes that we come back to over and over again around the life of Louise Langdon is around her diaspora journey, right? Dr. Collins described it so beautifully in her initial presentation. in celebration of emancipation a couple of years ago. I remember just basking in that. I still have the note that I wrote to myself on the phone after listening to that presentation, how just, you know, moved I was by it. What then, if you think that these decisions are left to the local community, what then is the role of the diaspora, of the Grenadian diaspora, in honoring these legacies? What is our role? How do we play a part? Do you have any thoughts to offer on that?
It's a very good question. I think the diaspora should definitely, be involved in many ways. I think, as Professor Collins was suggesting, ways in which we can actually, write stories. We can do paintings and things of the sort. We can also take part concretely, like encouraging our people back home to participate in such actions. We can start petitions, and be part of petitions. I don't think there are any limits in terms of what we can do in the diaspora, right? But I always like to defer to people on the ground in Grenada. Perhaps it's contrary to the Garvey approach, because I know one of the criticism of the Garvey movement was that many of the activists in the diaspora were, initiating actions on behalf of Africa from the outside. But I think with the forced migration of our people, in the historical sense, in terms of the African, the various slave trades of Africa, but particularly the Atlantic slave trade, we are people that were displaced. And in terms of the more contemporary migration, economic push and pull factors, we're, as I was kind of indicated in my presentation, we're a transnational people. And so I think we should take advantage of it. There are lots of advantages of that situation that we're in. And we should advocate for full participation across the board, where we are and where we dream to be.
Thank you very much. Somebody says, yes, well, we name our schools after saints. So why not name them after our own saints and martyrs? And I think that that's something that we can agree on. Again, you're welcome to send your questions in from the audience. We have a little time for questions. So what I'm getting from the audience is an overwhelmingly positive response to the presentations, and everybody seemed to have enjoyed it very much, and they commend the presenters and so on. I am going to direct a question at Dr. Merle Collins. And it's a little bit of a personal, something that is of interest to me. Again, in terms of storytelling and in terms of how important it is to tell our stories, how do you see the role of scholars like yourself being, apart from, of course, participating in this beautiful way, how do we as scholars connect with communities to help to tell these stories? To what is our role? Because like Martin said, we don't want to meddle where we're not needed in a sense, but in some other ways we are needed. So how do we strike that balance between the role of the scholar sort of in the ivory tower and the Grenadian, the person who is interested in community and wants to contribute?
Right. Well, thanks for that question. It's thought-provoking, and I guess we also always have to be thinking about these things. And, perhaps I could begin by answering, for example, the bit about, Anne Worm's question. We name our schools after saints. Why not use real saints or real martyrs? And, there I thought, yeah, but, the point for me is more about education and conversation. And I guess that's where the community thing comes in, because over the years, our schools, our buildings have been named after all the colonial people who now, if you try to change the name of a building, people get very upset. Sometimes when you investigate the story of that particular colonial, you say, oh my gosh, that's who the place is named after. So, we had that kind of top-down approach. I think it is important to have discussions, and this is where the community comes in, and this is where scholars come in, I think, so that, to me, the approach is also very important, and always realizing that you're not just coming in as the scholar from outside with all of the knowledge, but you're learning a lot on the ground as well. And so I think, for example, the changing of the name of a school, if the community is interested enough, this is, for example, why I spend so much time talking about responding to the thing about, okay, so this Malcolm, he is anything to us? Because I think those are important questions coming from the community. And I say what my perspective is. And so, we could begin a discussion. And as I think of La Digue, I remember, for example, when I was at Holy Innocents School, someone after the talk, because I had this talk at the school, and after the talk, someone living in the area came to me and asked me, do you know the story of the school and the church next to it? Do you know the story of this strip of land here? And I said, well, I think I know a little bit, but I really don't know a lot. And then when he spoke to me, he knew a lot more than I did. And I thought, this is wonderful. So that kind of exchange. And to me, that this is where, as scholars, we sometimes approach things with a lot of the kind of top down, we are the people who know. But I think it is important to recognize that we know some, and to be humble enough to be able to acknowledge that, yeah, we know some, and we know some of the things we get from books, etc. There are people on the ground who really, have a completely different perspective sometimes, and who have a lot of information that we approach, not just from the perspective of taking it so that we could write it in some book that's on a shelf only for academics to read, but to have that kind of exchange so that we are also interested in learning more about our communities, as they are interested in learning from us, what are the things we find out in these institutions. So to me, one of the things that is important is having discussions. I was going to say discussions like this, but discussions like this and other discussions actually in the community, where we recognize that we're not just giving, but that we're also taking, that we're learning, that it's an exchange. So to me, that is one of the things I would say about academia and community, about diaspora and community. So that when you're recognizing that you don't just go, say, to do a presentation, and that is it. It's good to be part of a community so that you really understand what's going on. That's part of an answer, of course, but
Thanks very much. No, I understand what you're alluding to very much, and of course, as we continue to do this work, all of us together, we make an appeal to the communities to assist, right, to collaborate, right. That it's not absolutely something that you just come in thinking that you have, that is the anthropologist of old. I'm going in and extracting everything and not not thinking that the people that I'm actually working with are the ones who have all the knowledge or have a lot of the knowledge to give. At this time, I believe my co-host also has a question for you, Dr. Collins. So I'm going to turn over to Lindona now.
Dr. Collins, the question in the chat, one of the questions in the chat is, as you continue to further your research and to document Louise's story, is there consideration in publishing a book on Louise?
Yeah, I didn't see that question, but yes, there is. And I haven't quite decided yet in what form, but yes, I at the moment, writing things in different forms and trying to figure out what might be best. So I guess the short answer there is yes.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. Well, we're excited about that. That's excitement. And for one of our attendees who would know, Angus Martin, he's telling us that the Grenada Reparations Committee has been given the okay to its proposal to research, engage with Grenadians at home and abroad, and recommend to government possible names of streets, places, and institutions across Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique to be changed to reflect Grenadians for the 50th anniversary of independence in 2024. So that is something for us to get on and really indicate our interest in and advocate for. Thank you for that information, Angus. Thank you very much. At this time, we're looking to wind things down. If there are no more questions that anyone wants to ask, we're going to just thank our presenters for this evening, Dr. Mal Collins, Mr. Martin Felix, Professor Martin Felix, and Worm is giving her final charge. She says that is action by the Reparations Committee. And we look forward to the work of the Reparations Committee, which has an important role in redressing some of these historical imbalances, like Dr. Collins indicated, in repairing some of our relationships to coloniality that persist in the naming of things in Grenada. And somebody saying, Rhoda Morenzi is saying, I remember Mr. Langdon, the father of Mrs. Louise Little. He used to go out for walks on afternoons in La Digue with a cane and a top hat. I remember a sister of Miss Little in La Digue, also in La Digue. And I'm not catching the name of the place, but it's exactly as you say, these are the people who know. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that anecdote with us, Rhoda. Well, again, this is an ongoing series of lectures that are going to be held to celebrate, commemorate, honor the life and legacy of Louise Langdon Little and her son Malcolm X. You heard it here first. Dr. Collins is busily going about her research, and we're hoping to hear something from her also in that regard. Again, thank you very much to our esteemed presenters, to our technical team behind the scenes, to Caribbean Freedom Fighters, the Institute for People's Enlightenment, Dare to Understand. Thank you to my co-host and co-moderator this evening, Ms. Lindona Laguerre, Ms. Claudia George, who gave the opening remarks. I am your co-moderator for this evening and your host, Tesfa Aki Peterson, signing off and telling you come back again and hang out with us next year. We'll be doing more of the same, maybe with a different set of faces, but definitely with the same intention and with the same things in mind, right? The honoring the legacies of our Grenadian sons and daughters. Somebody says, thank you for a wonderful experience. Indeed, it has been so. We say, we honor our dear daughter Louise and our dear brother Malcolm. We say ashe, ashe, ashe. And as we continue to celebrate their legacies, there is much that they can contribute to our Grenadian stories and to our Grenadian patrimony. Thank you so much again. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again with us next year. Good evening.
Malcolm X is known the world over as a civil leader, black nationalist fighter. Every man was born of a woman. So who is this woman who gave birth to Malcolm? Louise Langdon later, a freedom fighter too. A sweet Indian, she come from England. Louise Langdon later, must we remember too. As a young woman, she left Grenada, looking for greener pasture. She migrated to Canada. With the spirit of faith on inside her, she became a Gavi worker, a Pan-Africanist fighter. Louise Langdon later, a freedom fighter too. A sweet Indian, she come from England. Louise Langdon later, must we remember too. Must be contribution of this special woman remain in oblivion. Instead, she should serve as a beacon, as an inspiration for every black woman. Louise Langdon later, a freedom fighter too. A sweet Indian, she come from England. Louise Langdon later,